Hi, guys. All right, let me just set this up. Welcome. Hopefully, you can hear me because my microphone was not connecting, but we're good. So, we're going to be talking about spiritual awakenings. If you are going through them, what's the sign? How do we gracefully walk through it? All that good stuff. If you don't know me, my name is Nikki Novo, and I am a spiritual teacher. My biggest body of work is around intuition. I was not raised intuitive. I wasn't born intuitive. I was actually raised Catholic, went to Catholic school my whole life. And I actually started to have my own spiritual awakening and started to see spirit guides and started to be able to read energy. And I basically trained myself to read energy, and it was super fun. So much so that people started to ask me to teach them. And yeah, that's how I got here. But I was originally a fashion and beauty editor and then moved into this work, which I love very much. So I'm so excited to share a little bit about spiritual awakenings and, what you can do to like survive them, basically. So we're going to talk about the signs first. So if you see me looking down, it's because I wrote down some notes and I want to share with you. So first, like, what is a spiritual awakening? To me, I know that like a spiritual awakening can feel like a bit of a crisis, like almost like, shoot, like this life I was living was totally fine. And then somehow I got, I was dumped by somebody, or I lost my job, and all these 2020 COVID happens. And all of a sudden I am like seeing the world differently. And I have a lot of questions. So to me, I know that like often when you're going through that, you feel like your life is kind of falling apart. But from teaching so many people and from having several spiritual awakenings, because yeah, spoiler alert, like you don't just have one, you'll have like many. I have learned that a spiritual awakening is actually a remembering. So I feel that like it's less about, oh my gosh, my world is falling apart. And it's more that you're all of a sudden your human self, right? Because your human self is mind, body, and soul. But the soul is a part of us that has lived for many lifetimes and is the wisest part. And it's really like that part that we're like trying to connect to. So when you're having a spiritual awakening and life looks like it's kind of a falling apart, I actually see that as like you having a remembering. So your human self all of a sudden is like, oh my gosh, wait, I'm remembering like that I came here for something. I'm remembering that there was like a soul part of me that set up this lifetime, that made a soul's contract, that made a soul's purpose. So even though it feels like a crisis, it's actually like all of a sudden this phone that you've always had access to that has not been working all of a sudden starts working. And it's not working well. You're getting a little bit of like feedback and it's glitchy and all those kind of things, but you're starting to finally hear your soul, which is like such a big deal. But I know that like the way it shows up in life can feel very weird and very confusing. So I want to talk about that today. It's usually following a crisis. So for me, my first I had two that I like that were early on that I can still that I really point back to that I remember. Who knows, maybe we had spiritual awakenings as kids, but we just don't remember. But the first one I had was I was engaged really young because I grew up, my family's Cuban and very traditional Cuban Catholic. And I was like raised to get married, like, really young and, to do all that stuff and be a good girl and all that. So I was engaged to my high school sweetheart. And 2 months before the wedding, I was in New York City, just traveling with some of my girlfriends, just having like a girls' weekend. And I was there in Rockefeller Center. I don't know if you guys have ever been there. It's very busy and loud. And I mean, New York City is such a loud place. And I was just there and I had like a moment of quiet, which is just like, I had just like a moment of presence, basically. Like nobody, even though it was so loud there, somehow I was able to hear myself. And I heard this voice, like literally like God, like speaking into my ear. And the voice was like, it said like, you are meant for bigger things. Like almost this life that I was going down that was very typical. Like I had just graduated from college. I already had my first job. My boyfriend was a good guy. And, he also had a good job and like I should marry him. That's a beautiful path, but it just was not my soul's path. And I was trying to like live other people's blueprint, basically. And that voice was like the first time I remembered. So it's like so to me, that voice is intuition, which you'll hear me, we'll talk more about intuition in another day. But to me, the intuition is the voice of the soul. So basically, I had a moment to hear, like, that phone finally worked and my soul was calling, and it like was telling me, like, listen, this path you're on is like not your path. Like, you are on what I like to call a default path, like the default, like what everybody else is doing, all that kind of stuff. And that voice like really told me to get off of that path and like to really get on my true path. So I came home from that trip and I broke off the wedding. I broke off the engagement. I broke up with my boyfriend. Like, all these things changed my life, moved from Miami, and ultimately moved to LA. And it was my first real awakening. And that one was like hard, but also like very inspiring. And then there are some awakenings that are really, really difficult that like you did not ask for that. You know what I mean? Like, this was hard because I had to break things off, but I kind of like, I knew I wasn't happy, so it wasn't too much grieving. But then I had another spiritual awakening later in my like mid to late 20s, where I was dating this guy who I really loved. And when I met him, I just thought like, oh, we're going to be together forever. It was definitely a soulmate, which we'll talk about soulmates one day too. A soul, that I had lived other lifetimes with. Like, I knew this person and I just felt like, oh, I've met him again in this lifetime. We're supposed to be together. And out of nowhere, after, a couple of years being together, out of nowhere, he breaks up with me. And that was like, I did not ask for this awakening. Like, I was doing just fine as an editor at a magazine. I'm doing fashion and beauty, like, did not ask for this. And what that led me to was actually, I met with my first psychic after this, because of course, like, you get dumped, you don't know what's happening. And I was like, either I was going to go to like a therapist, do some drinking, or go to a psychic. And I decided to do a little bit of everything. And I ended up going to the psychic, who changed my life. And she was actually the first one to tell me that I was intuitive. She introduced me to like some, some like studying. I learned about like angels and how they communicate with us. And so that was the beginning. And it was like hard for me because I liked my life, like, I was this fashion and beauty editor. I had a good boyfriend. I had a cute apartment. Like, everything was going good until this guy broke up with me. And I was ushered into this like weird wizard metaphysical world that like I didn't want anything to do with. But it was my true path. And it was my soul telling me like, hey, just kidding. I know you like this stuff, but we're going to kind of veer over here. So I just wanted to share those like little pieces of 2 spiritual awakenings that I've had. I've had several since then. They don't stop. They keep coming. But just to let you know that like some are cool, like, some that you want, and then some are really like, and those are not even as hard things, right? Maybe it's like from a death of a loved one, or you lose your job, or you lose your marriage, whatever it may be. So often awakenings, unfortunately, come sometimes from like crisis, from things that in our life that end up like crumbling a little bit. So if you're there, I just like want to let you know that I see you, I'm like with you, and I promise you it's going to get better as long as you follow the calling of your soul, which I know is hard because like you want in that moment to fight, what you want to fight and go back to the comfort. It's like, I just want to go back to being the magazine editor. I just want to go back to like being with that boyfriend. Like, I don't want any of this, like this intuition stuff that's waking up. Like, but the more you fight it, like the harder the awakening is. So I would say like, you want to kind of just like do your best to surrender into where your soul is calling you. And just know that like, it's just step by step. Like, it'll show you like little things here and there. I wasn't asked to leave my magazine job, overnight. It took many years for me to ultimately get into this work, but I was just like following the breadcrumbs. And that's like my first tip for you that will make a spiritual awakening a little easier. So, and also first sign, right, that you're going through a spiritual awakening is maybe something's falling apart. Maybe there's a little bit of a crisis, that kind of stuff. Like, your life is really changing and you didn't really ask for it to change, right? So that's like one of the first signs. Then the second sign is sometimes like a little less dramatic, where what you used to tolerate in your life, like what used to feel okay, like now feels painful. So for example, I grew up in Miami, and life was good in Miami. And then just like one day out of nowhere, because what happens too is like as you're healing, because some of you might be bringing on these spiritual awakenings, like they might not just like be happening out of nowhere. You might have started healing. You might have started going to a therapist, or maybe you started to read some self-help books, or you started working out and you're starting to heal yourself. And what happens is that healing is going to cause a spiritual awakening. It's going to cause things to shift and change, and for you to become more like your soul. So if you're going at it that way, sometimes what happens is that like it almost feels like overnight you can no longer like handle what your life is. Like almost like you're like, holy shit, like how did I create this life? Like almost like, who put me here? Like who gave me these kids, and who gave me this partner? Like who gave me this job? Like all of a sudden you realize that like you're the life that you created, right? Because like you applied for that job, maybe you married that person, or whatever it may be. But sometimes like as you're going through that awakening, you're almost like, this is like not my life, and like this feels so uncomfortable. Like how, and it's a little frustrating too, because it's like, how do I change this? How do I turn this around? All that. So if you're feeling that, just know that you're not a brat, and like it's like to not be hard on yourself, because it's just we are so the soul is calling you because it's asking you to live according to your soul. That's basically what's happening. So there's going to have to be changes in your life. Like the life is not like exactly, that path is not exactly your path. It doesn't mean you have to like break things apart and break up, your marriage or leave your job or anything like that. But it's just like not truly authentic to you. And sometimes the best way for us to see like what is truly for us is to actually see what is super annoying and not for us. So I know it's really hard to be in a place where things are annoying, like where like this is pissing you off, like where like this life you did not mean for it to happen. So I know that can be like annoying, but try not to get like annoyed at being annoyed. I instead try to be like, okay, like what is this annoying feeling where is it trying to bring me? What is it trying to create? Oh, like I used to love like staying home with my kids, and now I'm really annoyed at that. Well, perhaps I'm being called to like have a little something of my own, a little part-time job, a little, whatever, or a whole new change. Like don't be afraid to be annoyed, because it's just directing you towards your soul's true path. So if we fight being annoyed and we like resist it, we're going to miss the arrow that it is, because it's like really trying to point you in a direction. Okay. Another sign that you're going through a spiritual awakening is that you start to like understand that your mind is creating a lot of your experience. So for me, I remember like, because that's like the awakening, right? Like they say that like, oh, like the veil's been lifted, or like you're out of the matrix. Like you actually realize like, oh shoot, like my mind has like a default mode, and it has like all this programming, and I've never stopped to question it. And now all of a sudden my thoughts are not really aligning with like what I truly believe. So an example would be, I have this girlfriend that I work with, and I'm like feeling super competitive and jealous about her. And I'm just like going through the actions of like being jealous and competing with her. But then there's like this little voice in me that's like, I don't even believe in that. Like, I don't believe that women should be competitive. Like, I don't believe that we should be jealous of each other. But your body, right? Like the human part of yourself is on like this automatic, like a default mode that's acting like jealous and competitive, when like the truth of you, that wisdom, the soul is like, dude, that's not even who we really are. Right. So that separation between the mind and the soul is like a staple of the spiritual awakening, because what's happening is you're separating. All of a sudden, you're not like, oh, I'm just a human. You're finally realizing like, oh, I am a spiritual, like the spirit, this soul that is experiencing human life in a human body. And part of the human experience is a mind, a body, and the soul that's like driving everything. So the soul is inside this vehicle, like my body is a car and my brain is my engine. But before a spiritual awakening, all you know is the engine. Like the engine is like, I am everything. Like there is nothing other than me, the engine, right? There's no space for the soul and there's actually no space for the body. So the engine is like everything. And that's really like what creates the ego, right? Like the ego is running the show. And a spiritual awakening is about realizing that that's like actually separate. So in order to do that, you actually like learn a lot about the mind. So if you find yourself like studying the mind, that was actually one of my intros. Like I was fascinated. I remember, I went to Catholic school my whole life. And in college, I think it was, or maybe it was my early 20s, I was given a book, You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay. It's like a classic, right? And in the book, it's like just very simple that like your brain, your mind, your thoughts create your reality. And I was like, what? Like I went through all this like religious study, like I was very well educated and like nobody taught me this. Like I couldn't believe it. But in a way, we're not ready to like see that information until we're ready to live soul led. So I would say like if that's coming up for you, like keep going down the rabbit hole. I mean, there's some things that are true, some things that are not when it comes to the mind, but it is important to start separating yourself a little bit, to create that separation, to be like, oh, like I'm a spirit that lives in a body that has a mind, but everything the mind says is not necessarily true. Sometimes my mind is saying something that my grandmother used to say. And then my grandmother's mind taught my mom's mind to say that. And now my mom has taught my mind to say that. So we have this generational messaging that is like so on autopilot. Like I didn't even have a chance to question that because it was just an ongoing dialogue in my mind. But if I don't understand that like my mind is just a machine, it's just an engine, and that what is truly creative is the soul, then I'm just going to believe everything my mind says, right? So part of the spiritual awakening is to start seeing that separation. And that is also why you might find yourself going down a rabbit hole of like learning about the mind, your self-talk, like your dialogue, what you're saying, what your mom used to tell you, what your grandmother used to tell your mom, like all of that is you basically detangling the human experience, like realizing that we're not just human, we're something else. And one of the first steps will be understanding the mind. So keep going down that rabbit hole if you have already gone there. The next thing is that another sign, sorry, not the next, because you might not have all these signs, guys, just so you know. But another sign is that you start to ask big questions. And like, this is, a little difficult because it's not like you can get an answer right away. But so when I first graduated from college, I moved to LA after I broke off that wedding that I told you guys about. I moved to LA and I started to work in the film industry because I was really interested in like entertainment and film and all that stuff. I was in publicity because I studied public relations. And I loved that job. Like it was super fun. I was around a lot of creative people. It was, super like, what's the word? Like, I don't know, it fed all my senses basically. So you would think I would be happy. So I got, I was working at a big studio. It was like a big deal. And like after a year, I was like, this is not making me happy. Like what's happening? Right. And I started to ask these bigger questions, which I was annoyed that I was asking because sometimes it's better to be asleep, right? Like sometimes aren't you like, I wish I could just be content like my friend who she's happy with her job and happy with the house that she lives in. And I seem to like always be unhappy. And it's not that you guys are unhappy. It's that your soul is like so much bigger and creative than like sometimes the life that we are told to live. So I should have been happy, right? At that job. It was everything, but it wasn't making me happy. And that was hard to hear myself ask those questions. And the questions are usually like, for me at that time, it was like, what am I doing with my life? Like, maybe I have like a bigger purpose. Like, is this it? Like, I'm just like making money for these studios and making money for these actors. Like, is that really what I'm going to dedicate like hours and days towards? Like, is that what I'm doing for the world? So this need to like want to do something better, like for the world, this question of like, why am I really here? Those are some of like the bigger questions. Um, what does this all mean? Like, am I supposed to be living this? So it's kind of like these, crisis kind of questions. And they're a little scary, but remember, it's really those questions are a sign that you are remembering. Because the truth is, before your soul came this lifetime, and if you guys are interested in this, I'll recommend 2 books that can be helpful. But your soul, like before it came to this lifetime, it was like, okay, like I'm gonna make, a contract, like I'm gonna make a little itinerary for Nikki. Like, these are like the soulmates I think she's gonna bump into. Like, this is what I see myself doing. This is what like I need to learn in order for my soul to evolve, to go to the next level. So the soul is actually like making a plan before we come. It's just that part of the human experience is to forget. So we like born out of our mothers and like just forget everything. And at some point, you start to awaken, but really you are remembering. So this is information you've always known. You just didn't have access to it as like the human that you've been living. So these questions that sound like, woo, super out there are really just like text messages that you're sending to your soul, right? Remember like that phone, like you're like, well, maybe if I can send these message, and you're trying to get the answers, and you're going to look for the answers outside of you, which is normal. You're going to go to a psychic like that, like I did. And, you're going to like ask your friends and read some books and all that kind of stuff. But the truth is like the person you're really sending that question to, or not the person, but, the part of you is that soul, like the soul that does know, right? That like actually signed you up for this lifetime. So that part of us is the part that knows. And in order to get access to that, it's, process, intuition, quiet, which I'll make other videos on, but just know that you're not, it's a great thing that you're asking those questions, and to really like not shame yourself or to make yourself think that you're like dying, you are dying. There's a part of you, the ego, sorry, my phone is going off. The ego is dying, but the soul is being born and like being awakened. Like it's like Sleeping Beauty. Like all of a sudden the soul, like the true self, starts to wake up. And yes, there is a part of you that's dying, but there's not a need for it anymore. So don't be afraid of losing it. Okay. And then the last sign, which is not an easy one, but sometimes when we're going through spiritual awakenings, we start to have health issues. And so for me, I was diagnosed at 3 years old with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, and I've had it my whole life. And actually, the spiritual awakening, the first one I told you about, the breaking off the wedding, it came with like a really intense flare in my knee. And I have seen this like across the board. Like I've worked with so many people. I've, done over 700 readings. I've taught thousands of people like how to find their own intuition. And it's a theme. Like our bodies, when our soul is trying to like get our attention, like if it can't get through, like through the intuition, if life is too busy or whatever, like the body starts to manifest the misalignment. So it's like when we are out of alignment with our soul's true path, the body will show symptoms of misalignment. And this is really hard because you feel uncomfortable and you feel like you don't have the energy to do the things that you need to do to get out of it. But often the health journey is part of your journey, like to the awakening. So, you got to balance it out, and the journey is not like one size fit all, right? Like your journey might be a mix of like doctors that prescribe you like super hard medicines, and also holistic doctors. And it's not about like, I don't know, following like what we think is supposed to be your journey, like with health wise, or what's right and what's wrong. It's really just about like following it through and be like, okay, body, what are you trying to say? Like, what are you trying to tell me? Like, where are you trying to bring me? And so for me, when I had that flare up, interesting enough, well, one of my flare ups when I was a magazine editor, right before that guy broke up with me, I started to have a flare up. And for the first time, I didn't want to do like steroids or anything like that, because that's what I usually was given as a kid. And I was like, I can't live like this. Like, I can't live like getting these steroids. There has to be another way. My dad's a doctor and I grew up in a very medical family. So there was not another opinion. That was the opinion. And I really was like, now that I was an adult, I wanted to like find my own way. And I went down this rabbit hole of like finding like green smoothies. Like basically it was just like this concept that like, you can eat foods that make you inflamed and you can eat foods that that bring inflammation down. And I was having an inflammation problem. So it seemed very simple to me. I was like, oh, like, dude, I should like pay attention to what I'm eating. Like nobody's told me this before. And actually, when I went through that, I actually found these women who were like very early, like pioneers in like spiritual teachers and like self-help authors. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is a job. And it was actually, I wasn't ready to think of that as my job, but I saw the example. I was still a fashion and beauty editor, but like this weird me thing brought me down this weird rabbit hole of like finding this whole other career, which is actually very important to like the version of you see today. So it was uncomfortable and shitty, and I had to do all sorts of things. And every time it comes up, it's annoying, but it brings you somewhere. And that is like almost because when our soul calls us, like we can't help but fight it, like we can't help but resist it. And when it calls us, like sometimes the health stuff like makes us do things, like it makes us surrender in a way that we wouldn't have surrendered it before. So we definitely don't want so I always like every time I talk to my soul, I'm like, listen, if there's another spiritual awakening coming my way, like, let's try not to do it with the body. Like, can I be in good health? Like, please be easy on me. But sometimes that's a little bit of like the rattling that it needs, unfortunately. So we just have to kind of, find the balance of not that you brought this on to yourself and not that this has to happen to you, but like, this is where I am. And I think there's an opportunity to hear my soul more as I go through this. I want to look at the comments if that's okay with you guys. The health call to action has been real for the last, Alyssa, I hear you. It's really difficult and hard, but that surrender and that's kind of like acceptance and surrender of like walking it. It's just, I'm sure you've also met crazy things and been brought down like crazy rabbit holes that you like would have never been brought down. So it's like we have to be patient because there is something there for us at some point. Kenya, oh my God, I've been feeling this lately. I've been having my current job lately. I feel like I'm not living up to my potential, fulfilling my life's purpose. Something's got to change. Yeah, Kenya, I hear you. And that is like, it can feel frustrating, but like, it's really just your soul calling you. So we talked about like some of the signs and then like, what can we do? Right. It's 10:33. 33 is like such a good sign, right, guys? I'm over, Jessica, I know you're over the health stuff. Me too, 100%. I'm like, I just want a slice of pizza, damn it. Like yesterday I had like I had a pizza and then like I could feel my knee just like swelling a little bit. I'm like, guys, come on. Like, can I just have a slice of pizza? So how do we like answer the soul's calling, right? Because the spiritual awakening is just like the soul calling us. So like, what can we do to answer it a little bit better? Like, how can we, how like, I don't know, I don't want to say like obedient because that word is crazy, but like, how do I follow it a little bit more? And definitely like some alone time, like the more you, like set some time aside and be like, okay, I'm just going to sit with my soul and I'm going to hear it a little bit. I like to have a notebook with me. And this is part of intuition. And we'll do more like intuition talk later. But this is really like you're trying to hear the messages that are coming through from your soul that are trying to take you down a certain path. If we're too busy and we don't like set time aside, it's just going to cause like more havoc. Like, so just make sure that you're spending a little bit of time. And also I love like the idea of like being in relationship, like with the soul, that you don't feel like so alone. Like, it's almost like your human self is, being like, okay, cool, soul, you put me in this video game almost. And I'm like talking to you, like, I need you to guide me, to like to show me the way. And for those of us who are raised like Christian or Catholic, or have are like trying to figure out our spirituality, the way, just so that, like, as somebody who grew up Catholic, the way I see it is my soul is like that divine part of me that is a part of God, of like the Almighty. So I'm just like a piece of the divine. So it's okay for me to like connect with my soul and like communicate with my soul, because it's the divine within me. It could also be seen as like the Holy Spirit if you grew up Christian. So it's like basically like I'm speaking to the divine within me, and the divine within me is helping guiding me here. So I like, it's okay to have that like relationship. It is like your relationship to have, like we don't need anybody to tell us like how to have our relationship with our divinity. And that divinity is going to guide us through this crazy world, and, find that balance between like living real life, working, making money, eating food, raising kids, all that kind of stuff, but also feeling like I'm connected to my soul, and I'm like making the best out of like what I was assigned to do. And definitely part of awakenings is always bringing change, because what's happening in awakening is that you were living a default path and you are moving to the soul's true path. So you do have to make some changes. And the changes are not black and white, but just be like open to hearing like what is more of your true path. And the thing that's going to help you the most to get on, or the trait that's going to help you the most to get on the true path, is bravery. So if there's anything to pray for, is to pray for bravery. Like, divine, like, please give me the bravery I need to live my soul's true path. Because it's not, it's like, it's so much easier to live the default path, because the default path is socially accepted. It's like what people want us, how they want us to live, how small they want us to live, like what our parents want for us, what society, our neighborhood, whatever. And to live the soul's path requires more bravery and courage. So as you're going through your awakening, my intention and my wish for you is that you find the bravery within you that helps you really live that soul-led path. So yeah, guys, that's what I got today. I hope that was helpful. Thank you for joining me. This was my first YouTube live, and it was just so fun to be with you guys and to see the comments. So thank you so much. I hope that this was helpful. And if you have any other ideas for other live sessions, if you can drop that in the comments, I would super appreciate it, because I really want to do this, and I'm excited to be here with all of you. So thank you. And I'm sending you a lot of love on your spiritual awakenings, and your soul knows the way. So may you know that you're not alone. All right, everybody. Thank you.